The sound of silence can be deafening. Sometimes, in that silence, you discover who you truly are. 3 days ago, I stood at my office window, watching a young eagle attempting its first flight. The mother eagle wasn't pushing, wasn't coaxing. She was simply watching from a distance. The young eagle stood at the edge of that nest, trembling, looking around desperately for help that wouldn't come. And in that moment, I saw you, I saw myself, I saw every human being who has ever stood at the edge of greatness, looking around for someone to hold their hand. That eagle stood there for hours. And do you know what fascinated me most? It wasn't the fear in its movements. It wasn't even the height of the nest. It was the absolute necessity of that moment of solitude. Some lessons can only be learned alone. Some strength can only be found in isolation. Some powers can only be discovered when there's no one else to rely on. We live in a world obsessed with collaboration, partnership, and teamwork. No man is an island. They say it takes a village. They insist. And while there's truth in these statements, there's also a dangerous lie hiding within them. The lie that you cannot, should not, must not do it alone. The most transformative moments of your life will happen in solitude. Your greatest breakthroughs will come when no one is watching. Your most profound revelations will strike when no one is there to validate them. Why do we fear being alone? Why does the thought of tackling a challenge by ourselves feel like punishment rather than opportunity? Because we've been conditioned to believe that solitude equals loneliness, that independence equals isolation, that doing it alone equals doing it wrong. But that young eagle, it wasn't abandoned. It was being empowered. The mother eagle understood something we've forgotten. Growth demands space. Power requires solitude. Greatness necessitates isolation. You're here today because something inside you recognizes this truth. Something in your spirit resonates with this message. You're here because you felt it. That calling to step away, to stand alone, to face your challenges without a committee, without a support group, without the constant validation of others. And yes, it's supposed to be hard. The resistance you feel, that's normal. The fear that grips you when you think about going it alone, that's natural. But natural doesn't mean necessary. Normal doesn't mean inevitable. Why the hardest paths are often meant to be walked alone. Why your greatest achievements will likely come from your most solitary moments. And why the very thing you're afraid of, doing it alone, might be exactly what you need to reach your highest potential. This isn't about isolation for isolation's sake. This is about understanding that your most significant transformation will happen in the moments when you stop looking for someone else to save you and start becoming your own solution. Let me share with you a story that will change forever how you view the power of standing alone. I met him on a crisp morning in Nepal, at the base of a mountain most people only dream of climbing. His name was Akash. And he sat alone at a small tea house. His weathered face telling stories was hadn't yet shared. What caught my attention wasn't his solitude. Many climbers sat alone that morning. It was the peace in his eyes. The kind of peace that comes from understanding something most of us spend our lives fighting against. They all think I'm crazy, he said, gesturing to a group of climbers huddled together, planning their ascent. 23 years I've been climbing this mountain. And 23 years they've told me I'm doing it wrong. He sipped his tea slowly, his eyes fixed on the peak that loomed above us. Akash was known in these parts as the solitary climber. While others formed teams, hired guides, and moved in groups, he climbed alone. Not because he couldn't afford help. He was actually quite successful in his business back in Kathmandu. Not because he was antisocial. The warmth in his conversation proved otherwise. He climbed alone because he understood something fundamental about human growth. The mountain, he said, shows you a different face when you're alone, when there's no one to impress, no one to blame, no one to rely on. That's when you see his true nature. That's when you see your true nature. I spent that entire morning with Akash, watching as groups of climbers began their ascent. They moved like centipedes, connected by ropes and shared fears. But Akash sat there, patient, waiting. When I asked what he was waiting for, his answer changed my life. I'm not waiting, he said, I'm listening. The mountain speaks to each climber differently. In a group, you hear only the group's interpretation. Alone, you hear your own truth. As the sun climbed higher, Akash shared the story of his first solo ascent. He had been part of a climbing team for years, successful by any standard. But something was missing. I was hiding, he admitted. Hiding behind the group's decisions, the guide's expertise, the shared responsibility. I was climbing mountains but not growing stronger. Then came the day when his entire team fell sick the night before a planned ascent. He stood at the base, just like that young eagle at the nest, facing a choice. The mountain beckoned. But every safety protocol, every piece of conventional wisdom said to wait, to never climb alone. In that moment, he said, I realized something profound. All my life, I have been using other people as shields against my own potential. Every time I faced a real challenge, I looked for someone to share it with, not because I needed them, but because I was afraid of discovering my own limits. Akash climbed the mountain that day. Alone, it took him twice as long as it would have with a team. He made mistakes. He had to turn back several times to find better routes. He faced his fears, his doubts, and his limitations all alone. That climb stripped away everything I thought I knew about myself, he continued. When you're on the mountain alone, there's no one to blame for wrong turns, no one to praise for good decisions, no one to share the burden of choice. It's all you. And that's when you discover that only is more than enough. As he prepared for his day's climb, Akash left me with words that I've echoed in my mind ever since. The world will tell you that greatness comes from collaboration, that strength comes from numbers. And they're not wrong. There's a place for that. But they forget to tell you about the other truth, that your greatest self can only be discovered when there's no one else around to find it for you. I watched him begin his solitary ascent, his figure growing smaller against the vast white canvas of the mountain. No ropes connecting him to others, no shared equipment, no collective decision making. Just one man facing one mountain, discovering one truth. This wasn't just a story about climbing mountains. This was a story about life, about growth, about the journey we must all take to discover our true capabilities. And sometimes that journey must be taken alone. The truth about solitude is that it strips away our pretenses. When no one is watching, when no one is there to impress, we finally meet ourselves, raw, unfiltered, real. In your most isolated moments, who are you really? Not who you pretend to be on social media, not who your family expects you to be, not who your culture demands you become, but who you truly are. Isolation isn't just about being physically alone. It's about creating a space where your inner voice becomes louder than the world's noise. A space where you can't hide behind others' opinions or seek shelter in group thinking. And yes, this space can be uncomfortable. It's supposed to be. When you're truly alone with your thoughts, your dreams, your fears, that's when the real work begins. That's when you start asking yourself the questions you've been avoiding. Why am I really pursuing this goal? Am I living my purpose or someone else's expectations? What am I capable of when there's no one to lean on? Your capacity for growth expands in direct proportion to your ability to stand alone. Think about a seed planted in the ground. In that darkness, in that isolation, something remarkable happens. The seed doesn't need an audience to grow. It doesn't need validation to push through the soil. It doesn't form a committee to decide whether it should become a tree. It simply grows because that's what it was designed to do. What most people don't understand about solitude is not about disconnecting from the world. It's about connecting with yourself. When you embrace solitude, you're not running away from relationships. You're building the most important relationship of all, the one with yourself. In this noise-filled world, we've forgotten the power of silence. We've forgotten that our greatest insights don't come from endless discussions, but from deep, solitary reflection. We've forgotten that strength isn't always built in gyms full of people, but in private moments of pushing through our own limitations. When you're alone, there's nowhere to hide from your weaknesses. There's no one to blame for your failures. There's no one to dilute your responsibilities. And while that sounds scary, it's actually the most liberating thing that can happen to you. Because when you're alone, truly alone, you discover something incredible. You are enough. Every major breakthrough in human history, yes, many came from collaboration, but the initial spark, the fundamental insight, almost always came from someone willing to stand alone with their thoughts, their theories, their beliefs. Someone willing to walk away from the crowd and venture into uncharted territory. Your mind works differently in solitude, without the constant need to explain, defend, or justify your thoughts to others. You can explore ideas that might seem crazy to everyone else. You can fail without witnesses. You can experiment without judgment. You can evolve without permission. The goal of solitude isn't to stay alone forever. The goal is to discover who you are when no one else is around, so you can bring that authentic self back to the world. It's about building such a strong foundation within yourself that you don't need constant external validation to know your worth. Remember this, the world's opinion of you is just that, opinion, but your understanding of yourself, gained through solitary moments of truth. That's knowledge. And there's a world of difference between opinion and knowledge. In your moments of solitude, you'll face your deepest fears. You'll confront your hidden doubts. You'll feel the full weight of your own choices. And yes, sometimes you'll feel like you're drowning in the silence. But that's exactly when breakthrough happens. That's when you discover that you can swim. The power of self-discovery doesn't come from reading about yourself in books or from others telling you who you are. It comes from those moments when you stand alone, face your challenges alone, and discover, often to your own surprise, that you are stronger than you ever imagined. This journey of solitary growth isn't easy. If it were, everyone would embrace it. But that's precisely why it's valuable. In a world that increasingly pushes us toward constant connection, the ability to grow through solitude becomes not just an advantage, but a superpower. And speaking of superpowers, let me share another story that will show you just how transformative this journey can be. One of the biggest lies we've been sold is that success requires constant collaboration, that achievement demands continuous connection, that growth necessitates perpetual guidance. We're told that if we're not part of a mastermind group, if we're not constantly networking, if we're not always putting ourselves out there, we're doing something wrong. Do you know where diamonds are formed? Not in networking events, not in group sessions, not in crowded spaces. Diamonds are formed deep beneath the earth's surface, under intense pressure, in complete isolation. The very thing we fear, being alone under pressure, is exactly what creates something of extraordinary value. You've been conditioned to believe that doing things alone means doing them wrong. When you tell someone you're starting a business alone, they ask, who's your partner? When you say you're working on a project solo, they wonder, who's mentoring you? When you decide to tackle a challenge by yourself, they warn, you need a support system. Now, don't misunderstand me. There's nothing wrong with partnerships, mentorship, or support systems, but they should enhance your journey, not define it. They should support your growth, not substitute for it. The problem arises when we become so dependent on these external structures that we forget how to stand alone. Here's another misconception, that personal growth should be comfortable, guided, and validated by others. But real growth, transformative growth, often happens in moments of uncomfortable solitude. When you're alone with your thoughts, facing your fears, confronting your limitations, that's when true expansion occurs. Society tells you that isolation is dangerous, that being alone means being left behind. But what if the opposite is true? What if the real danger lies in never learning to stand alone, in never developing the strength that comes from solitary achievement, in never discovering what you're truly capable of because you've always had someone to lean on? The truth about personal growth is that it's intensely personal. Yes, you can learn from others. Yes, you can be inspired by others. Yes, you can be supported by others. But the actual growth, the transformation itself, that's a solo journey. No one can grow for you. No one can transform for you. No one can discover your true potential for you. Learning to walk as a child. Yes, people encourage you. Yes, they created a safe environment. Yes, they were there to catch you when you fell. But the actual act of standing up, of taking those first steps, of falling and getting back up, that was all you. No one could do it for you. No one could take those steps on your behalf. The same principle applies to every significant growth in your life. Others can guide you, support you, cheer for you. But they cannot grow for you. That journey is yours alone. And it's supposed to be that way. The most successful people aren't those who are constantly surrounded by others. They're the ones who've learned to be comfortable with solitude. They're the ones who've developed the strength to stand alone when necessary. They're the ones who understand that true power comes not from constant connection, but from being able to disconnect when growth demands it. We need to break free from this collective delusion that everything worthwhile must be done in groups, that every achievement must be shared, that every journey must be accompanied. Some paths, often the most important ones, must be walked alone. And this brings me to another remarkable story, one that will challenge everything you've been taught about the relationship between solitude and success. I remember meeting Mariana in Dubai, not at a fancy hotel or a business conference, but at the edge of the desert at 4 a.m., where the city lights fade into endless sound. She wasn't what you'd expect from someone known as the desert runner. No expensive gear, no support team, no social media crew documenting her every step. Just a woman with worn out running shoes and eyes that had seen more sunrises in solitude than most people see in their lifetime. Most people think I'm running away from something, she said, adjusting her simple hydration pack. They don't understand I'm running towards something myself. 5 years earlier, Mariana had been the epitome of success by society's standards. Executive position, corner office, team of 50 under her command. Every decision she made was collaborative. Every achievement was celebrated in groups. Every step of her career was carefully guided by mentors and advisors. She was living the connected life everyone preaches about. Then came the day when everything fell apart. A major project failed spectacularly. Her team scattered. Her mentors distanced themselves, and the support system crumbled. In 1 week, she went from being surrounded by people to being completely alone. That week felt like dying, she told me as we watched the sun begin to paint the desert sky. But it wasn't death I was experiencing, it was birth. In her darkest moment, she found herself drawn to the desert. Not for a guided meditation retreat, not for a group experience, but for a simple solo run at dawn. That first run turned into a daily ritual. 1 mile became 5. 5 became 10. And soon she was running ultramarathons across the desert, alone. People kept trying to join me, to form running groups, to create a community around it, she said. They didn't understand that I wasn't running to build connections. I was running to build myself. What Mariana discovered in those solitary miles was something profound. The voice that had been guiding her career, her decisions, her life. It was a voice of abomination of others' expectations, society's standards, and collective wisdom that had drowned out her own inner knowing. In the desert, there's nowhere to hide from yourself, she explained. Every step is yours alone. Every decision, whether to push forward or turn back, whether to rest or endure, it's all you. The desert doesn't care about your resume, your connections, or your social media following. It only responds to who you truly are. One particular run changed everything for her. 50 miles into a solo journey, she got caught in a sandstorm. No support team, no fellow runners, no external validation, just Mariana and the howling wind. Instead of panicking, she did something remarkable. She sat down in the middle of the storm. When the world was nothing but swirling sand, I finally heard it, my own voice, crystal clear. Not the voice of my mentors, not the echo of motivational speeches, not the collective wisdom of business books, just me. And that voice knew exactly what to do. She emerged from that storm different, not just physically, but fundamentally transformed. She had discovered what I now consider one of the most profound truths about personal growth. Your greatest clarity comes when there's no one else around to clarify things for you. Running in groups is easier, she admitted. Preparing for another solo dawn run. But running alone is transformative. Every solo mile strips away another layer of who you thought you were, revealing who you truly are. As I watched her disappear into the desert dawn, I understood something powerful. She wasn't running from connection. She was running toward the most important connection of all, the one with herself. And that's the universal truth her story reveals. The path to your higher self often looks like loneliness to others, but it's actually the road to the deepest connection you'll ever make. Personal power isn't something you can borrow, buy, or bargain for. It's not a commodity to be traded or a skill to be taught. Personal power emerges from the depths of solitude. From those moments when you discover that everything you need is already within you. Let me break this down to its essence. When you rely constantly on others, you're not just sharing the load. You're sharing your power. Every time you look outside yourself for validation, every time you wait for permission to move forward, every time you seek consensus before taking action, you're giving away pieces of your personal power. When water flows as a river, it follows the path of least resistance, conforming to the landscape around it. But when water builds pressure beneath the earth, when it's forced to stand alone against immense resistance, it transforms into a geyser, bursting forth with tremendous power. Your personal power works the same way. It builds in isolation, grows under pressure, and emerges stronger when you're forced to stand alone. The fundamental principle of self-reliance isn't about being able to do everything by yourself. It's about knowing that you can. It's about developing the inner certainty that no matter what challenges arise, you have the capacity to face them. This isn't arrogance, it's authentic confidence born from experience. When you embrace solitude as a path to power, something remarkable happens. Your decisions become clearer because they're truly yours. Your actions become more decisive because they're not diluted by committee thinking. Your progress becomes more consistent because it's not dependent on others' momentum. Personal power isn't about becoming invulnerable. It's about becoming intimately familiar with your vulnerabilities and learning to work with them, not against them. In solitude, you can't hide from your weaknesses. Instead, you learn to transform them into strengths. Every time you face a challenge alone, you're not just solving a problem, you're building a reservoir of personal power. Every time you push through fear without someone holding your hand, you're not just moving forward, you're expanding your capacity for courage. Every time you make a decision without seeking consensus, you're not just choosing a path, you're strengthening your inner compass. The philosophy of personal power rests on three fundamental truths. First, all genuine power comes from within. External forces can support it, but they can't create it. Second, this inner power must be developed through solitary challenges. It's like a muscle that only grows when stressed. And third, true personal power doesn't diminish others. It inspires them. When you develop real personal power, something fascinating happens. People don't feel threatened by your strength. They feel empowered by it. Because authentic personal power isn't about domination. It's about illumination. It shows others what's possible when you dare to stand alone. But let me be clear. This journey to personal power isn't about becoming a lone wolf. It's about becoming so secure in your own strength that you can choose connection rather than depend on it. It's about building such a strong inner core that you can be truly present for others without losing yourself. The strongest trees in a forest, they grow tall not because they lean on each other, but because they each develop deep, individual root systems. Yes, their branches might touch, their leaves might mingle, but their strength comes from standing alone, developing their own foundation, reaching toward the light in their own way. The paradox of personal power is this: the more comfortable you become with standing alone, the more valuable your connections with others become, because now you're connecting from a place of strength rather than need, from choice rather than dependency. This power, once developed, becomes unshakable because it's not based on external circumstances. It doesn't vanish when supporters leave. It doesn't diminish when critics appear. It doesn't depend on favorable conditions. It remains steady because it's built on the bedrock of self-knowledge and self-reliance. Remember, personal power isn't about having all the answers. It's about having the strength to face the questions. It's not about never needing help. It's about knowing you can handle things even when help isn't available. It's not about being perfect. It's about being perfectly comfortable with your imperfections. And this brings us to the practical application of these principles, to the real-world implementation of this philosophy. So how do you translate this understanding of personal power into tangible, real-world action? Let me share with you the raw, unvarnished truth about implementation. Because theory without practice is merely philosophy, and philosophy without action is just wishful thinking. First, you must create your moments of deliberate solitude. I'm not talking about hiding from the world. I'm talking about intentionally stepping away from the noises that accumulates the constant input of others. Start with 30 minutes each day where you tackle your most important task alone. No phone, no email, no consultation, just you and the work that matters most. When you face a decision, give yourself the gift of silent contemplation before seeking any outside input. Train yourself to hear your own wisdom first. You see, most people rush to get opinions before they've even formed their own. They're so afraid of making the wrong choice that they never develop their decision-making muscles. Start taking full responsibility not just for your failures, but for your successes too. When something goes wrong, don't look for someone to blame. When something goes right, don't rush to share the credit. Own your outcomes completely. This isn't about being selfish. It's about being honest about your role in your own life. Develop what I call a solitary practice. Each day, spend 1 hour working on your most challenging project completely alone. No collaboration, no consultation, no validation, just pure focused individual effort. Watch how this transforms not just your work, but your relationship with your own capabilities. When you're working in a team environment, because let's be real, most of us do, practice what I call collaborative independence. Contribute to the team from a place of individual strength rather than collective dependency. Bring your fully formed ideas to the table instead of waiting for the group to think for you. Here's another practical step. Start documenting your solo achievements, not for others to see, but for you to remember. Keep a private record of the challenges you faced alone, the decisions you've made independently, the mountains you climbed without a crew. This becomes your evidence of capability, your personal proof of power. Learn to sit with discomfort without immediately seeking comfort from others. When you feel uncertain, resist the urge to immediately call a friend. Post on social media or seek validation. Give yourself time to process, to think, to find your own way through the fog. And here's perhaps the most important practical truth. Start small, but start now. And don't wait for the perfect moment to begin this journey. Don't wait until you feel ready. Don't wait until you have everything figured out. The power of doing it alone builds gradually through consistent practice in everyday moments. Take responsibility for your own growth. Stop waiting for someone to promote you, to choose you, to validate you. Create your own opportunities. Build your own platforms. Design your own growth path. The moment you take full responsibility for your development is the moment your true power begins to emerge. Remember this practical wisdom. The world makes way for those who know where they're going. When you move with the certainty that comes from true self-reliance, opportunities appear, doors open, paths clear. Not because of luck, but because you're moving with the power of authentic conviction. Your journey of self-reliance will often look like stubbornness to others. They won't understand why you insist on doing things your way, why you step back from group thinking, why you choose solitude over constant connection. Let them misunderstand. Your results will speak louder than any explanation ever could. The moment has come. Right here, right now, you stand at the threshold of your own transformation. Not tomorrow, not when you feel ready, not when others approve. But now, because the truth is, there will never be a perfect moment to begin standing alone. There will never be a time when everyone understands. There will never be a season when solitude feels completely comfortable. Look at your hands for a moment. Really look at them. Everything you need to build your future, to create your destiny, to shape your reality, it's right there in your hands, in your mind, in your spirit. The power you've been searching for, the strength you've been seeking, the wisdom you've been waiting for, it's already within you, waiting to be unlocked in moments of courageous solitude. You don't need another seminar. You don't need another book. You don't need another person's permission. What you need is the courage to embrace your own company, to trust your own judgment, to walk your own path, even when that path feels lonely. Starting tomorrow, I challenge you to spend the first hour of your day in complete solitude. No phone, no social media, no distractions. Just you and your thoughts, you and your dreams, you and your potential. In that hour, you'll begin to hear a voice that's been drowned out by the world's noise, your own. Remember the eagle from our opening story. That young bird didn't need someone to teach it how to fly. It needed the courage to trust its own wings. You don't need someone to teach you how to be great. You need the courage to trust your own greatness. The world is waiting, not for you to fit in, but for you to stand out, not for you to follow the crowd, but for you to find your own way, not for you to echo others' truths, but to speak your own. Your greatest achievements, your deepest insights, your most profound transformations, they're waiting for you in moments of solitude. They're waiting for you to have the courage to stand alone, to think alone, to create alone. So I challenge you, do it alone, not because you have to, but because you choose to, not because others have failed you, but because you're ready to succeed on your own terms, not because you're afraid of connection, but because you're ready for true strength. It's supposed to be hard. The resistance you feel, that's growth knocking. The fear you face, that's power awakening. The doubt that creeps in, that's strength building. Your time is now. Your moment is here. Your power awaits. Stand alone. Stand strong. Stand proud. Because the greatest story you'll ever tell begins the moment you dare to walk alone. The moment you dare to fly solo. The moment you dare to be you. Stand up. Step forward. Soar high. Your wings are ready. Your time is now. Do it alone. Because that's exactly how it's supposed to be.